Hey folks, I've just read a chapter of the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, and I just wanted to record some thoughts because a lot came up. This is from the chapter called The Ascent, which is chapter 1 of part 4, and I'm reading it from the abridged anniversary edition. So, just thoughts came to my head as I was doing it, and I was like, I've just got to get some thoughts out. And you've got to strike when the moment is right without thinking, to quote Roger Waters. Right, so it's a dark book. If you've read it, you'll know that, and probably if you haven't read it, you'll also know that. And Willow's just got up, as she tends to do as soon as I hit record. Here she comes. But this chapter is called The Ascent because it's a chapter about hope. And so after 300 pages of darkness and brutality, we get Solzhenitsyn explaining why he's grateful to have been in prison. Some of it made me think of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for those that don't know, I got sober through Alcoholics Anonymous back in 2005. So I'm coming up to 20 years next month. And it was through the steps of AA that I got sober. And some of that came up as I was reading this chapter. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the concept of the grateful alcoholic is something that baffled me when I got into the rooms of AA. And something which I now understand, and it's very similar to what Solzhenitsyn's expressing here. So first of all, he starts out by talking of the great fork of camp life. So I'm going to read quite a few quotes as I go through this video. From this point, the roads go to the right and to the left. One of them will rise and the other will descend. If you go to the right, you lose your life, and if you go to the left, you lose your conscience. One's own order to oneself, survive, is the natural splash of a living person who does not wish to survive. But then he goes on to talk about those who, to do anything to survive, would end up becoming camp informers. So going against goodness, this is evil, I suppose you would call. Looking out for themselves, survival at any cost, informing on your fellow prisoners. So, that's not really where we want to be in life, is it? So let's move forward a bit. He then goes on to talk about sacrificing the way of life, the integrity of the family and the spiritual health of the people and the very soul of our fields and forests and rivers. To hell with them, the result is what counts. So this is what is kind of ingrained into these prisoners. The result is what counts, and the result is not in your favour. And he says no, it's not the result that counts, but the spirit. Not what, but how. Not what has been attained, but at what price. And then he goes on to talk about renouncing the aim of surviving at any price. And as soon as you have renounced that aim of surviving at any price and gone where the calm and simple people go, then imprisonment begins to transform your former character in an astonishing way, to transform it in a direction most unexpected to you. So, spirit, doing the right thing, I think, in all walks of life, and this is something I've learned through Alcoholics Anonymous, and the word sobriety or recovery, depending on how you want to define it. It's about doing the right thing. And he talks of how in prison one has a sense of freedom that one does not have outside, and particularly in Soviet Russia, where one's thoughts were being policed, as we're now seeing in the UK, actually, with the Graham Linehan arrest at Heathrow Airport for expressing thoughts in a tweet. So, yeah, be careful. But what's happening here is that in prison, one's thoughts are not being policed, one's not being asked to go and vote a certain way. This is something he talks about, where you're dragged in to vote according to your conscience, but not really. And that no one in Soviet Russia was actually free, but in prison you are. Which is an interesting concept, isn't it? And then he talks about happiness and slavery, which got me thinking of one of my favourite bands, 9 Inch Nails. They have a song called Happiness and Slavery on the Downward Spiral. And I wondered whether Trent Reznor has read Solzhenitsyn. Your soul, which formerly was dry, now ripens from suffering. And even if you haven't come to love your neighbours in the Christian sense, you are at least learning to love those close to you. Those close to you in spirit who surround you in slavery. And how many of us come to realise it is particularly in slavery that for the first time we have learned to recognise genuine friendship. What do you think about that? And then he talks about a doctor who treats him on the ward in prison. So he's talking about a discussion that this doctor has with him while he's lying in bed and the lights are out one night. The doctor is called Boris Nikolaevich Kornfeld, and he talks of his conversion from Judaism to Christianity. This conversion was accomplished by an educated, cultivated person, one of his cellmates, some good-natured old fellow like Platon Karatayev. And I was stoked at this point because I know who Platon Karatayev is. He's a fictional character from War and Peace. So I was like, yay, cultural knowledge. I have some of that. And this doctor says to Solzhenitsyn, on the whole, do you know, I have become convinced that there is no punishment that comes to us in this life on earth which is undeserved. Superficially, it can have nothing to do with what we are guilty of in actual fact, but if you go over your life with a fine-tooth comb and ponder it deeply, you will always be able to hunt down that transgression of yours for which you have now received this blow. So the idea is here that most of the prisoners are in prison for no crime whatsoever. Political prisoners or whatever it would be, so that Stalin could keep up the quotas to get the workforce to do the labour. So the idea of correction, re-education, is anathema because these prisoners have nothing to atone for. They haven't committed any crimes. But what this doctor here is saying, that if you consider your own life, you will find something there for which you have to atone. This is something that comes up in AA. It's one of the steps. In fact, it's 2 of the steps. Step 4 took a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So in that step, you go through your entire life with a fine-tooth comb and you look for examples of things for which you need to atone, and then later on you make amends and stuff. But step 4 is the big searching, fearless moral inventory of your entire life up to that point. And then in step 10, which is what my Substack personal inventory is based upon, is we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So at that point, having done the big searching, fearless moral inventory of your life, right up to that point, you then continue to do that on an ongoing basis. So you don't have to go through reams and reams and reams of life. You just go through the last week or 2 or whatever. So that's kind of what my Substack is about. That's how I look at my own recovery, try and enhance it, try and become closer to the person I want to be by first acknowledging who that person is and then working out where I'm going wrong. So that kind of idea. And about creativity, by sitting down with a pen and a bit of paper and just writing stuff out, a way of connecting to source, to God, to something greater, to a higher power. That comes through me and out onto the page. So when I read this, I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then Solzhenitsyn goes on to become really impressed with what this doctor said. The doctor dies quite soon after this, and Solzhenitsyn feels that he's taken on these words he's now the carrier of these words. And he takes them on board and makes them into his own thing. And he says, I lay there for a long time in that recovery room from which Cornfield had gone forth to his death. And all alone during sleepless nights I pondered with astonishment my own life and the turns it had taken. In accordance with my established camp custom, I set down my thoughts in rhymed verses so as to remember them. And the most accurate thing is to cite them here, just as they came from the pillow of a hospital patient, when the hard labour camp was still shuddering outside the windows in the wake of a revolt. And here's the rhyme. When was it that I completely scattered the good seeds, one and all? For after all I spent my boyhood in the bright singing of thy temples. Bookish subtleties sparkled brightly, piercing my arrogant brain. The secrets of the world were in my grasp, life's destiny as pliable as wax. Blood seethed and every swirl gleamed iridescently before me. Without a rumble, the building of my faith quietly crumbled within my heart. But passing here between being and nothingness, stumbling and clutching at the edge, I look behind me with a grateful tremor upon the life that I have lived. Not with good judgment, nor with desire are its twists and turns illumined, but with the even glow of the higher meaning which became apparent to me only later on. And now with measuring cup returned to me, scooping up the living water, God of the universe, I believe again, though I renounced you, you were with me. Powerful words. And then we get to what's perhaps one of the most well-known lines from this book, which I had read before, but I didn't know from which chapter they came. And it was only when I lay there on rotting prison straw that I sensed within myself the first stirrings of good. Gradually it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts. This line shifts. Inside us it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained, and even in the best of all hearts there remains an uprooted small corner of evil. So, it's quite powerful, isn't it? Since then I have come to understand the truth of all the religions of the world. They struggle with the evil inside a human being, inside every human being. It is impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it is possible to constrict it within each person. I mean, wow. We all have within us the capacity for good and evil. Some of us have more propensity to one than the other, but I think what I'm learning as I go through life and I seek meaning and purpose and improvement, self-improvement, that I come to believe, there's an AA phrase for you, I come to believe that meaning and purpose is about love. It's about connection. And it's about doing the right thing in all instances. And I mean, this is why the grateful alcoholic concept exists, much like what Solzhenitsyn's here saying about being a grateful prisoner. He says, Lev Tolstoy was right when he dreamed of being put in prison. At a certain moment, that giant began to dry up. He actually needed prison as a drought needs a shower of rain. All the writers who wrote about prison but who did not themselves serve time there considered it their duty to express sympathy for the prisoners and to curse prison. I have served enough time there. I nourished my soul there, and I say, without hesitation, bless you, prison, for having been in my life. I mean, all the years of alcoholism that I went through would not compare in any way, shape or form to 8 years, I believe it was, that Solzhenitsyn was imprisoned. However, there is a similarity there in the recovery process and how one can find oneself in suffering. The still suffering alcoholic is a common phrase that you hear for those who have not found recovery. But I understand also that the still suffering alcoholic doesn't necessarily mean you've quit the drink. You could, no, what am I saying here? Doesn't mean that you will suddenly recover having quit the drink. You can still suffer and do. I mean, life is suffering. You'll have heard that phrase before, I'm sure. And finding meaning in suffering, perhaps finding meaning of life through suffering is a better way of putting it. And, you know, we suffer in all kinds of ways through life, but rising above it and using that experience to become better humans, you know, that's the message I'm getting here. This is all just from one chapter, this video. This is, what, 20 minutes? I can't even see the length of it. But, you know, I've still got another couple of 100 pages to go, and I didn't even begin to talk about some of the hardships. So it's an amazing, amazing book, and to read this from a recovery perspective, it's so powerful, and I'm having a great time with it. I've been meaning to read this book for a long, long time, and I'm just so glad to be getting to it now. And it's just coincidence, I think, that it's tying in with my 20-year recovery anniversary. Yeah, there we go. I hope you got something from this. That's just a few thoughts on this chapter, The Ascent, from the Gulag Archipelago. Thanks for watching.